Also, if you go hiking, please make sure somebody knows exactly where you're going.
Also, like, I feel like people rely on like water fountains nearby.
Really? Not a bit though. I do.
Well, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done everything other than das, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh yes.
So, what is das?
We don't know yet,
I know.
Application.
No, das is not application.
Made up word.
What?
Made up word.
No, application is actually a word, but das is not application. What? I mean, it has good translation. Okay? So, if you would please turn to Tanya's, which you all have, because I've repeatedly asked you to have Tanya's in this class, to chapter 3. I would like you to figure out what das is. Chapter 3. Please tell me what das is. Trying to figure out what das is. But now, obviously, chapter 3 is back in the discussion of the godly soul, right? So you're going to see what das is in the godly soul, and then we're going to work from there. But if you could please find what das is.
Knowledge. It literally says das and in brackets knowledge.
Okay, that's the translator translating it, right? But what? That's the meaning. That's the literal translation of the word, right? But if that's all I wanted, I wouldn't have sent you to the chapter. So what does the chapter say? Attachment and unity. So what is das?
Where does it say that?
It's at the end, the last paragraph.
Did you know?
Application.
No.
Somebody said that.
Well, I still
That's
said
wrong.
that.
It's very, very wrong. It's very
I
wrong.
didn't know what it would say.
Attachment and unity.
Okay,
Yes.
guys, I
Bringing it all together.
No, das is attachment. That's what das is. Das is attachment. How do we know that das is attachment? Would someone please tell me, how does the Alter Rebbe determine that das means attachment?
One second. Where is it?
Chapter 3.
I understand, but where it says thus self practice and vitality in the dice. Not there. Where?
Well, you have to look for it.
Give us a second.
How does the Alter Rebbe know that das means attachment?
Because unless he binds his knowledge and fixes his body premise.
That means the word das means attachment?
He's talking about unless you attach.
He speaks about the necessity of das. How do we know that das means attachment? The Alter Rebbe says so, but how does the Alter Rebbe derive that? He just waved his magic wand and says, you show me an attachment, and poof, means attachment. That's not exactly how it happened, right? How does the Alter Rebbe look in the text, try and figure out how does the Alter Rebbe know that das means attachment? And then I'll give you a modern Hebrew lesson.
Still in chapter 3.
Still in chapter 3.
And Adam knew Eve implies attachment and union.
That's right. Adam knew Chava. What does it mean? What does that mean? What is the verb knowing there implying? Like he took a class in Chava studies and now he passed the test.
Connected.
Right.
They were intimate, no?
Right. It meant they were intimate, right? So that means that there was a attachment and unity, right? So here we see that the verb ledat, ledas, right, or to make it a noun das, right, means to attach or connect. By the way, when you truly know something, you are attached and unified with it, which is a topic that we're not going to elaborate on at this moment.
Really?
Yeah, hurricane now.
What?
Yes.
No, that if you're attached to something, if you know something really well, then you're attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
You could know something really well and not be attached to it.
Well, then you wouldn't use the word das. The way Chassidus, there's a kind of knowing which is in that. In other words, what we would call academic knowledge, does not qualify as das.
Okay.
Right. That's exactly the point the Alter Rebbe is making. Now, in modern Hebrew, as in every language, words have connotation. So it's not enough to know the literal translation of a word, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if I ask you in English, do you know where the bank is? Everyone knows what I mean, right? And so if I were to ask you in Hebrew, how would I say that? Do you know where the bank is? No, I wanted to ask you, do you know where the bank is? Yes. Right? And so the word yodea, no, right? Good. Okay. The dati, to my mind, to my knowledge, right? Okay, good, right? Now I ask you.
If a firm person is a dati.
No, that's with an out and an ayin. That's from the word dalad saf, das, which means religion. By the way, das is a slur, just so you know. Okay. It's a slur.
Like slang.
No. What would be the English? The English equivalent of das would be like. There isn't really a good English. No, but it's no.
No, it's like saying a yali for a Hasidic.
Yeah, that's what it's like.
It's the same connotation, but
It's a derogatory thing. It's really derogatory.
Oh, really?
It's really derogatory.
It's like saying yali, but we say yali.
And it's derogatory.
I think yali is worse.
Well, that's because you're not in Israel.
What do you think is worse?
Anyway,
Exactly.
how do you say in Hebrew? Do you know? Do you know the laws of Shabbos? How would you say that in Hebrew? Ha'im ata yodea? Do you know? Right. Hilchot Shabbos, Hilchot Shabbat, right? Laws of Shabbos. Good? Okay. Seeing the pattern here? It's not so hard, right? Okay. How would you say, do you know my neighbor?
Makir.
Why do you have to say makir? All of a sudden we switched the word from Yodea to makir in Hebrew.
In Hebrew.
Right, in Hebrew, if you say...
You don't Yodea people.
Why don't you Yodea people?
Only Makir.
Why?
I know that we were reading it.
Why? I would like you to refer to chapter 3 of Tanya.
Because of not being married to that?
Something along those lines, right? Right. In English, we have this expression, knowing someone in the biblical sense. So if you use the verb yodea in the context of two people, it doesn't mean, like, are you familiar with them? Okay? That's a very important thing to know, right? It's a big faux pas to say.
I always say that, like, that's what I know.
Right. It just marks you as somebody who doesn't speak Hebrew.
No, why do they always know?
Okay. Okay. So das means attachment, connection. That's what it is. Okay. So now, what is that? Now, what happens when you are attached to something? When you're attached to something, you experience it more. I want to explain to you what I mean. Okay? So, let's say somebody is upset. Okay? There's something called empathy. You've heard of empathy?
Yep.
Yes? Empathy comes in two flavors. Did you know that empathy comes in two flavors? Yes. Comes in chocolate and vanilla. No. Okay. The first kind of empathy is called cognitive empathy. Does anyone know what cognitive empathy means?
You think about intellectual? It's a fear.
What?
You know about it.
Yeah, I know about it. In other words, if someone's upset and I can tell they're upset, that's called cognitive empathy, right? It's also known by philosophers as mind reading, which is not as mystical as it sounds. Right? For instance, when you chuckle, I can tell that you found something funny, right? That's called cognitive empathy or mind reading, right? I can tell what's going on in your psyche.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Then there's something else, which what most people call empathy, right? Which is going to give the generic empathy. And what does that mean? That when someone is upset, and not just that, and that you're not just aware that they're upset, appreciate that they're upset, right? Resonates that they're upset, but you actually, you experience.
You're upset also.
You're upset now. You're partaking of and experiencing their being upset, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense? Yes. The difference? Okay. So what is the difference between? Why is it that sometimes a person is, say, upset, and you're like, oh, I can understand they're upset, and it's like, but it doesn't affect me. And sometimes if someone's upset and their being upset really affects me. Why would that be? Because I'm attached to them.
So does that mean you cannot relate to it?
Not well. So this is there is this interesting thing where you can do something what actors do, which is like they try and find something similar in their own experience to arouse a parallel experience. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, for instance, let's say you have a friend you really care about, and they're going through something that you've never been through, right? But because you feel so attached to them, you feel so connected to them, right? Their difficulty has become part of your life, and you experience that difficulty as part of your own life in some way. Right? Okay. So this idea of das is this notion of attachment, and there's a famous pasuk, Yosef das, Yosef mechayev, which means if you increase in das, you increase in pain. Why would that be? If you increase in das, you increase in pain.
Well, from what, like you just said, like if you're attached to somebody, you're also going to experience their pain.
That's right. So people who want to live a pain-free life, what do they have to work on? Detaching. Yeah, being detached.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Well, detach yourself from yourself.
Well, so that's the thing is the more for now.
I'm distant.
Right, and let's just make people do this all the time. I give you a very simple example. Let's say you really want something, right? But there's a likelihood that the person you need to cooperate with you will say no. So you make it, you try and get it that you don't really want it that much, so that if you get a no, it doesn't hurt that much, right? You've experienced that?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, right, the more attached we are, the more viscerally, the more palpably we experience something. Okay? Also, by the way, the more...
Isn't it good? Isn't there an advantage to being attached? Don't you also get the good besides just the pain?
100%. Which is why one of the chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, when he's asked, what did the Alter Rebbe achieve? What was the Alter Rebbe's whole point? What was the whole point of chassidus? The whole point of chassidus is that Yosef das, Yosef mechayev, but it's worth it. You increase in knowledge, you increase in attachment, and is that going to make your life more pleasant or more difficult?
It'll make it more real.
It'll make it more difficult, but that difficult is more real, and therefore it's more worthwhile.
And does that go borderline with the dependency?
It does, but I want to stay away from that because that makes it more complicated than I want to get into. But there's an interaction there, right? Somebody that values personal autonomy above all else is going to want to really get rid of a lot of attachments, right? Because you are vulnerable to.
When you say attached to somebody, does it mean like you become close to them, or like you just kind of created a connection?
Well, you would have to explain to me the difference between what those two things mean.
Like close means that it's more than a connection, it's a lot of build up of over time and connecting, but connection is we live in the same, I don't know, we haven't known each other forever, but we both share the same interest in dancing, for example.
So I want to answer your question because from the question it tells me that you don't really get the idea fully, which is fine because I haven't fully explained it yet. We have different powers, different abilities. One of the powers, right, as we have, right, one set of powers we have is called the seichel, the intellect, right, which is the way to become aware of what's beyond ourselves, right? Okay, there's the chachma, we spoke about chachma, right? Spoke about bina. What das is also part of the seichel, but das is that ability to attach yourself to something. By attaching yourself to something, the effect is that it becomes very real to you. And if it's very real to you, will it affect you emotionally?
Yes.
Yes. Will you have a more nuanced appreciation of it? Yeah. So for instance, people often say das is application because if you're really attached to something, it's very real to you. If it's very real to you, do you have a better sense of how to deal with it than if it's just in theory, just in the abstract? Yeah, right? So das enables you to apply things, but das is an application. So now, there are people who are really, really intellectually gifted in the sense they can analyze things very well, right? So their bina is really supercharged. There are people who are very open and creative and, right, clever, right? They're chachmas, right? And one, to a certain extent, is independent of the other, right? Like there are people who can never come up with anything on their own, but if you give them something, they can develop it. And there are people that are really lousy at developing things, right? Conceptually. So what does it mean that someone is gifted with das? What would that mean if you had a person who was gifted with das? Before we get into the das of the godly soul and animal soul, what would it mean that they're gifted with das?
I have a question first. Could someone be gifted with DOS or something?
Yes. Just like you'd be gifted anything. You'd be right. Remember we spoke about this, that different traits come in different degrees?
Good at taking what?
You're good at what?
Good at attaching yourself.
At what?
At attaching yourself.
So communicating.
No. So, for instance, what would be an example? What would be an example of a person who's really strong with das? So, you ever hear the people say that they spoke to the Rebbe and they felt like when they spoke to the Rebbe, like the Rebbe was paying attention to only them. Like as far as the Rebbe was concerned, the only person in the world that existed in a genuine way was them. What's that? What? That the Rebbe had given him his full. He was fully attached. Like right now, I'm talking to you. And that means like you, a person created by God, fully there. That's real. And like everything else, right? And then there are people, right? Like no matter what's going on, their mind is always in a million other places. Okay? So, das, right? So you said about how long you've known somebody and stuff. If something takes you a longer time to understand, that means you're smarter or less smart.
No.
If you use two people, one person understands it, starting point is they don't understand. One person understands it for 5 minutes, the other person understands it after 5 hours. Who's smarter?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Me. But maybe they understand that specific.
Assuming the unequal level of understanding is equal, right? I'm not saying, well, you understand for 5 minutes, but you don't understand it very well. That doesn't count, right? They achieve the same level of understanding. One takes 5 minutes, one takes...
Okay, so the one that takes 5 minutes is
Okay. Yeah? Somebody has brilliant ideas once a day. Someone has brilliant ideas once a lifetime. Who's more creative? Who's more open-minded?
the one that has ideas once a day.
That makes sense? Somebody who's genuinely attached to the reality that this is a person after just meeting them, or someone who takes 5 years of interaction. Who has more das?
The one on the person.
Right? So yeah, a lot of times for us to have das in someone else as a person, it means we have to interact with them repeatedly over a period of time, which means we need other things to keep us interacting, right? Because we don't yet are attached to them as a person. So maybe mutual interests, we bump into each other repeatedly, and slowly over time we start to relate to them as an actual person in the world. Like there's a person with a life, and as that we start to feel towards them in a different way than just another face. And some people are gifted and they can do that very quickly, right? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So there's this other thing, which is to attach yourself to the reality that's beyond yourself. Not to become aware of it, not to make sense of it, but to actually actually attach yourself. And the result is that it feels very real. So for instance, little children do not have das in money. Now what does that mean? They're not aware of money?
They're not attached to it.
They're not attached to money. What does it mean they're not attached to money? I have little kids. They love getting
They
money.
don't understand it's the way it works. Like, they don't understand the way it works.
They don't understand. They're stupid.
Like, I don't know. Like when they go to bank and
Well,
there's no.
They don't use the money, their parents use the money.
What don't little kids get about money?
The value? No.
Where it came
The
from.
value. Or where it comes. There's two things. What do little children not get? In a little child's mind, what's $10 in the mind of a child?
Nothing. Everything.
They don't understand.
To buy a
10?
house,
It's the same as 100 and the same as 1.
No, that's an infant. I'm not talking about it. Take a 10-year-old. What's $10 to a 10-year-old?
They could buy
A
something.
candy bar.
A candy bar. Yeah? Right, now let me ask you a question, right? How do you get $10?
From working 1 hour babysitting.
Right? It involves work, right? It involves work, right?
No, literally though.
It's nice, that's a better way to raise it.
It's really sad.
It involves work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And so that money represents time and effort, right?
Right.
And money, right? And money means, right, not just getting right? Little children, the way they view money is like it's like a little present. Money magically shows up and you get it like as rewarded for behaving nicely, or for like doing something not good, or maybe even putting a little bit of effort. But what you're getting and what you're what you're getting monetarily is not proportional to the actual value of the work that you do. And then what's the money for is for like little extras here and there, right? But that's not really what money is. Money is literally your time and energy of your very life, right? Represented
So horrible.
Represented in a certain amount that you can then exchange for other things that you generally need to get through life, right?
Right.
So like, it's just funny, like I have smart kids and like the idea like we actually have to pay a mortgage and the electricity costs money and like the gas bill and like, you know, I come to teach in the yeshiva and that's how like we have a stable life. Like that doesn't sink in, but it is sunk in by the time you're an adult. What?
Did you try explaining that to them?
No, because it's not really like, it's not, you know, that's the nature, it has to do with the level of development of the mind. But by an adult, that is hopefully sunk in, right? So the idea of like not having money takes on very scary notions to an adult, right? And the notion of like having money and what that enables you to do can be a very powerful motivator in a way that just isn't for a child. Like if you tell a child, well, I'll give you some more money, like it kind of depends on like how much the child wants the candy bar or the bicycle, right? If you tell an adult that you'll get money, that's a whole different thing. You see what I'm saying? That there's a way of relating to the reality that you're attached, and because you're attached, its reality impacts you. And that is, by the way, that is one of the key elements of the seichel. In fact, so much so that one could make an argument that from the perspective of Chassidus, when we say seichel, the main part of seichel is not how wise or brilliant you are. It's not how chachma, it's not being how analytical you are, how well you can use logic. It's how good are you at attaching yourself to something that's outside and having it really sink in. This is real. And because you're attaching, you therefore sense it's real, it impacts you. In which case, from the perspective of Chassidus, the most unseichel person would be like an academic. Because what does an academic do? They spend all their time learning about something, but with this sense of detachment. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
With a sense of detachment.
Who?
Academics. Yeah? Okay. So what would it mean to have das in Hashem?
You're attached to Hashem.
And if you're attached to Hashem, Hashem starts to seem more.
Real.
And if Hashem starts to seem more real to you, that affects you.
Yeah.
And you have love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, and everything else in comparison seems to be less. Right? For instance, once, I'll give you an example. You remember that transition that occurred between being a child and being a teenager when your social status became more real than the toys that you had? Right?
No.
You don't remember that happening? And it might not have been a moment, but look back, when you're 7, right? Like, birthday parties are basically opportunities to do fun games and have presents. And if you're a teenager, right, that's not really what parties are, right? There's something that changes, that the social reality you become much more attached to and becomes much more real, and therefore it impacts your more emotions, right? And now try making a teenager feel good because they feel like they don't have a place in the social group at school by giving them toys. Even teenage worthy toys, right? Does it work? No. Could it work on a 7-year-old?
Yeah.
Yeah, although to be fair, you're just suppressing a deeper part of themselves that way. So I don't know if it's a good idea, but it would work. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, what is das in the godly soul? Das is the power of the godly soul that adds to what? To attach itself.
To Hashem.
And as a result, Hashem is very real to the godly soul.
What could be the negative?
Of das?
Yeah.
Oh, with the negative in terms of the animal soul?
Yeah. What would be? Sorry.
Yeah. No, by the way, that could be quite painful. Like, for instance, if you really...
Is that a negative?
It's not a negative, it just has a cost. I'll give you...
You can't be like too dependent into other things, of being attached yourself to things that aren't holy.
Yeah.
It's like that's the animal soul part of it.
No, the animal soul is a little bit deeper.
Okay.
What would be the difference between chachma, where Hashem is real to you, and das, where Hashem is real to you?
Okay, chachma is that it's clear that Hashem is real. You're open to the reality. It's obviously true.
But why is it not?
One second.
Yeah.
Obviously true is a statement about it, not a statement about that has no impact on me.
But is that
Das,
the same?
what's that? Das Das means I'm attached. And because I'm attached, it becomes real to me. Real to me means that it impacts me. Das does not tolerate inconsistency. I'll give you an example. Have you ever noticed that when you do something wrong, it's more comfortable not to think about it?
Yeah.
Why?
Okay, I hate that. Because it's not, so
It's something that psychologists call cognitive dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance?
What's your distance?
That we cannot have inconsistent das. That's how you put it in Chassidus. Das does not tolerate inconsistency. So if I'm really attached to a notion of myself as a good person, I can't face the fact that I do something wrong because now that's inconsistent, right? Okay. Now, can Chachma tolerate inconsistency? Well, think about it. When you discover something new, something that goes when you're open to something beyond, right? Well, obviously, whatever is beyond, it'll be inconsistent with what you previously thought, right? That's what makes it new. Chachma is very tolerant of inconsistency, right? This is why Chachma and Emunah are related. Emunah is like a very shallow form of Chachma. There's an awareness of something as being true. Okay, it's true. How does it fit there else? I don't know. Does it seem inconsistent? Sure, it seems inconsistent. It doesn't stop being true because it's inconsistent.
What's it? The truth is inconsistent?
It could seem that way. For instance, what? For instance, is it true that, I'll just give some facts.
Yeah.
Is it true that Hashem is the only thing that exists?
Yeah.
Is that seeming inconsistent with the way we experience the world?
Yeah.
Is that an obstacle for Chachma?
I get no.
No. Is it an obstacle for Das? Yes.
So what does Das do in a case like that?
Das requires it needs to confront that conflict, that dissonance, and resolve it somehow by figuring out how maybe one of those two things isn't what it's purporting to be. Maybe the world's existence really isn't the way it seems, and maybe it really is consistent with the notion that Hashem. That Das has an integrity to it. Das has an obsession and it has that's also something that you can force into yourself. You can force. Chachma is very different. Chachma is you're so open and you're so receptive that the way everything is, whatever it is, that's the way it is.
So if I believe in things and don't actually see it when it comes to Kedusha,
That is a lack of das. If you believe things and don't act that way, if you believe things and don't feel that way, it's all a lack of, right? One of the annoying things that happens, that has annoyed me in life, is that people come to me after learning some degree of Chassidus, and they'll come and tell me, I think I figured out my problem. And I say, yes, and what's your problem? It's like, my problem is with das. I'm like, real? I don't say this. Really? Like, that's the only thing the only problem that anybody ever has, really, is with, if you have das, you'll work everything else out, right? And if you have everything else with no das, then as the Alter Rebbe concludes chapter 3,
it's not real.
nothing's real. It's all a fantasy game.
Is that why you waited to put it at the end?
That's right. It all, everything else is a shell without das. Okay? And here's the great thing about das. Everything else is a shell without das.
Everything that you learn, if you don't become attached to it,
Yeah, then it's all
meaningless,
on a certain level, yeah.
it's just like floating.
Yeah.
It's like nice knowledge.
Yeah, you're aware, it's true, and it makes sense. Yeah, and I can fool myself into the fact that I really love it. And I can even, when I have enough ulterior motives to get my behavior to comply, I might even act accordingly. But deep down, it's over there, and I'm like, it's not real to me. And if I do have das and it doesn't make sense, I'll figure out how to make it make sense because it's real. I got to figure it out, right?
But what if someone says I don't know, an annoying comment after that, and be like, why I'm challenging? I'm saying whatever we all do, but what do you say then?
I'm just saying it's a universal. Das is the universal struggle. But now here's.
Do you think it's a bigger struggle in our generation, or it's because this world is so?
No, I don't think it's a bigger struggle in our generation. I think it's different, but it's not bigger.
There's a bigger disconnect in our generation.
I don't know if that's true.
Really?
I'm saying, especially in the era of Das, and the idea of attaching it.
I don't know that.
A lot of people feel this and feel and not necessarily always do.
Yeah, but I want to point something out, that nostalgia is great when it's instructive,
What's nostalgia?
thinking that things used to be better. One of the things that you noticeably don't find in the Rebbe's Sichas is a lot of nostalgia. It used to be wonderful. It used to be that people were like, the Rebbe doesn't speak like that. Why? Because on a certain level, it's just not true.
Right.
Now, if looking at previous things you find illuminating and instructive, which is how the previous Rebbe often describes things, then that's fine. That's wonderful, right?
The Friedrich used to say that?
The Friedrich used to speak about how wonderful things used to be. But that was basically to give you a description of what we should strive for, right? But the idea that, well, we used... What?
What time?
The shtetl. Yeah. But like, I don't know, everybody do this way. There's a pasuk which I don't remember off the top of my head that Shlomo Melech said. Basically, it says, "Don't ask for earlier times because that's not a sign of wisdom." You know, the Gemara says, you've heard of Moshe Rabbeinu? Yeah, things were pretty good in Moshe Rabbeinu's time, right? So you know that Moshe Rabbeinu had a whole falling out with the Jewish people. You've heard about that stuff happening, right? So they did the golden calf. Moshe wasn't upset, and he made his tent all by himself, right? So the Gemara says, so what do you think happened with Moshe Rabbeinu when he made his tent separate from the Jewish people? What was the, and anybody who wanted to connect to Hashem had to travel outside the camp to go to Moshe. How do you think the Jewish people related to that? Right? These are the people who left Egypt. They saw the miracles, right? Right? They seen the divine punishments, all that stuff, right? What was the attitude that people had towards Moshe? So, remember we spoke about Lashon Hara?
Mm-hmm.
So the Gemara says that men would tell their wives, you shouldn't go to Moshe. He's a shady guy. I don't know what he might do. That's how people would speak about Moshe sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. Goes in the Gemara.
Does that mean it's true? There's a deeper explanation.
What it means is that
Why do you say that?
because people are people.
People are nasty.
And people can be nasty.
Rude.
And people can be
To
rude.
Moshe Rabbeinu,
To
though.
Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah, people's like, well, back before when the Rebbe was here, it was all different. Yeah, there was one time there was a Sicha. The Rebbe was staying over Sicha on Simchas Torah.
People are nasty and rude.
The Rebbe was saying a Sicha on Simchas Torah. And the Sicha, the Rebbe was explaining how Moshe Rabbeinu was willing to give up his whole existence for the Jewish people. And that's how the Torah ends, about the idea that he broke the Luchos, and wonderful thing. And the Rebbe was literally crying. It happened to be, it was the 7th game of the World Series. And I don't know if you know how the Farbrengens were, but they had these bleachers set up with tables on top of tables so that people could... And in the back, on the other side, right, there were a bunch of guys hanging out waiting for the non-Jewish janitor to give them updates as to what's happening in the World Series.
No way.
Why? Why? Why am I telling you this? So you should feel depressed? No, just like this idea, once upon a time everything was wonderful. There's not once upon a time everything was wonderful, right? Once upon a time there was the Garden of Eden, right? And we all know how that one turned out. Okay? So it's different. There are things that were
How do you know that?
from people who are there.
My teacher
Tell me the
used to
story.
tell us, she's like, wait, staff and breakfast, the only guys from next door, no one was looking.
Yeah, you can ask people who are there who are not interested in hearing the propaganda. That there were people who are hanging on every word of the Rebbe. There were people who are not interested. Just like life is now, people are people.
Really?
People are people.
But everyone says that this generation is more modern.
I'll tell you what I think. Every generation had struggles. They're just different from generation to
That's
generation.
okay, right? But when people say, "Is das easier? Is being attached to Hashem easier than previous and harder now?" No, it's different.
No.
It's different. It's definitely different.
I don't think most of Lubavitch was
Do I think most Lubavitch? There's a place where it says that the Tzemach Tzedek had hundreds of thousands of Chassidim. Did you know that? Now, if you open up a book and read about the great Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, of the Tzemach Tzedek, and you count them, how many think you're going to get?
10.
I don't know, maybe more than 10. Maybe we can name 30, 40. So where are these 100,000 Chassidim? Oh, it's very simple, because the Tzemach Tzedek was recognized as the de facto leader of the Chassidically inclined segment of Russian Jewry, which was about half of Russian Jewry. So in some nominal sense, half of Russian Jewry considered the Tzemach Tzedek to be okay, right? That means they were all big servants of God. No.
Okay.
No, I mean, there's a requirement, like a person like has a little bit of maturity about these things. Okay. Now, getting back to discussion. So what would das of the animal soul be? What do you attach to?
Yourself.
Yourself. You're attached to yourself. Do you know what I mean that you're attached to yourself?
Like the ego gets
No. That's too... No. Let me give you an example, okay?
It's all about you.
No. That's all about you is the chachma of the animal soul, right? Das thing is you're attached to yourself. Well, what does it mean you're attached to yourself? So, what? Yourself is really real to you because you're really attached to yourself, so it's really real to you. So, for instance, I'm going to explain. Imagine that you're a surgeon and you're doing an operation, right?
Yeah.
And the nurse, the nurse, you ask the nurse, scalpel, right? And the nurse makes one of those one of those kind of like begrudgingly hands it to you, like they're annoyed with you. What happens after that? You're in the middle of a surgery, right? And you say scalpel, right? Instead of just professionally handing you a scalpel, they kind of like exasperate, blow out their breath, roll their eyes, and hand you the scalpel.
Well, you're in the middle of the surgery, so you're not going to have a bath with the nurse.
Really? That's what's going to happen? I would say most surgeons are in the middle of the surgery, so it's like it doesn't even fully register. Right? You're doing something. But on the other hand, it could really register, and then what happens?
He gets annoyed.
And now where is his mind?
On the ladies that
On what she said and how she's annoying. I like how we all assumed that the nurse was a woman. I didn't say the nurse was a woman. You said the nurse was a woman.
Yeah, but what if he's doing a laugh session?
I didn't say that the doctor was a man either.
I won't lie, the first thing I saw was a nurse woman and
Yeah.
honestly.
What if he's doing a laugh session?
One second. So this is the issue, right? Is
Does
that
anybody think otherwise?
I thought they were both women.
there you go.
I think the doctor's a man, the nurse is a woman.
Okay. The point is, the point is, right? So the doctor starts like inside. The doctor is like just that starts cluttering up what's going on, right? It really bothers them, right? And because it really bothers them, how attentive are they to the surgery?
No,
It can't be.
only
Right.
90%.
Right? You ever had that experience? Probably not with surgery.
I was going to say, I hope not with surgeon.
But have you ever had that experience? Like you're involved in something, and somebody does something which is annoying, and like it really doesn't register because you're really involved in whatever you're doing. And then sometimes,
It registers and you can't. And then you stop and you punch them.
well, that could be the result, right, of das. Right. So what's das? Das is you're really attached to yourself. So what do you experience as real? Yourself and things direct influence on you. How long can you go without eating? And I don't mean like physically before you die. I mean
Not long, like an hour.
with being just okay with not eating. Like you're like,
Like 4 hours? 5 hours?
well, I think that
That's
depends.
no time.
I think that depends on,
The person-
it depends on how much das you have in yourself. After all, have you ever been really involved in something other than yourself and gone extended periods of time without eating?
Yeah, when I'm distracted, like I'm
That's right, you're distracted.
when I'm really working on something, a project that has a deadline.
That's right.
No, I
So-
never forget to eat.
You don't even think about it.
I'm honestly, I never forgot to eat.
Okay.
I was like, oh, I haven't even been home.
So das means that you experiencing yourself, and then everything else maybe distracts you from yourself, but isn't right. But you're really attached to yourself, and so you experience everything as it as it relates to you. And by the way, when do people get really offended? When people are really insulting to them?
When it's real. When it's true.
And what do you have to what do you have to have in order to be really offended?
Close to them somewhat.
You have to be you have to have das in yourself.
What do you,
You have to be attached. You have to be feeling. You have to be
Is that
attached to
good?
yourself. No, it's not good.
It's
It's
not
not,
good.
offended by that?
yeah, you'd be offended.
Because if you're not.
You walk down the street. If you walk down the street, yeah, and somebody, right, and you overhear that somebody insulted somebody else. Does it bother you?
No.
But if they insult you, does it bother you?
Yeah. Oh, things would be
If
like,
it's true.
yeah.
Even if it's
Setting
wrong.
everything equal. Setting everything equal. That's not the point. I don't whenever I give you an example and I contrast one variable to another, just everything else has to stay the same. Otherwise, you don't get the other point. If someone insults someone else, does it bother you?
No.
If they insult you, it bothers you?
Yes.
Because
It can't bother me though if they insult somebody that I care about.
because you're attached.
To the person.
So whether you're offended is a result of them being their dignity being real, and their dignity being real is because you're attached to them, and so you're only insulted because you're attached to.
I kind of
Yourself.
disagree. I get like if there's a really overweight person on the street and I see someone come by and they're like, "Oh, you're fat." I'm like that offends me. I feel
Of
bad
cour-
for them.
Well,
If
should
they come
I?
over to me and they're like, "You're so fat, you're like a whale," I'm gonna be like, "Okay, cool, good for you."
Okay, but should I just leave that comment as, or do you want me to?
How about you say I'm really tall.
What?
Don't use a fat comment.
No, I wasn't using a fat comment. I just want. Do you want me to respond to what you said, or do you want me to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. The thing is like this. Many of us have something we have a self-conception. And through that, we extend what we're attached to. So, for instance, many of us have a self-conception of being upright and moral and whatever.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that we built into that. So, for instance, let's use the example you get, right? The idea of making fun of someone because of something to do with their body, right? Well, so what that has to do is like, I'm a moral person. I really attach the fact that I'm a moral person. And there's a certain kind of morality and immorality that's really built into that sense of what I am. And then I see that happening, it's like that's personally affronting to me, right? But it's all built off of this das in yourself.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying, and here's the thing, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing in the sense of like, it's like cruelty.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that what das of the animal soul means is that I am attached to myself, and therefore the more something directly relates to me, the more vividly I experience it. And the more remote it is from me, the less vividly I experience it. And by the way, that fluctuates, by the way, over time, right? For instance, when I'm really involved in something that's very remote from me, right, just requires my attention and focus, that distracts me from my natural das. Okay? Now, so what is the das of the godly? The das of the godly soul is that I am really attached to Hashem. So Hashem, and whatever I know or am aware of Hashem, is very real and vivid to me, right? And therefore affects me profoundly. And what's the das of the animal? So I'm very attached to myself. And therefore what's closer to me, in whatever way, shape, or form, I experience more concretely, more vividly, and affects me. So, have you ever noticed that, like, some people assume that when they're talking, they hear other people talking, that they're talking about them?
Yes.
Why would that be? Are they that stupid
No,
that they really think that every time people talk, they're talking about them?
They're insecure.
It's not insecurity.
It's because
They're talking about them.
I think it's they're thinking about themselves.
I think it's clearly they're gonna have a reason for you to talk about the person's gonna have a reason for them to talk about them.
That's
No,
insecurity.
they're not talking about me. I'm saying like, you can say like, what if you're thinking that they're talking about you, then you clearly have something for them to talk about.
Yeah, that's insecurity.
Why do you say it's insecurity?
Because if I'm talking to Sarah and then Missy's like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, nothing. We're talking about class." And you're like, "No, you're not. You're talking about me. I know you're talking about me. Why?"
Because why am I saying that? Because clearly you have something to
you're-
talk about.
it's-
No, but I'm asking you, why do you think it's insecurity?
Because it comes from a place of like you feel not comfortable with something in yourself. That's why we're saying the same thing.
Why?
Why?
It's not true. I'll tell you, like, I would like to think of myself as a pretty decent teacher. In fact, I'm pretty secure in my teaching ability.
Yeah.
I'm insecure about certain things. That's not one of the things I'm insecure about.
Yeah.
I'll be very honest with you. Like, if after I've given a class and I walk past and I hear people talking, and if I hear a snippet of a conversation that's remotely plausible that it's about the class I just gave, my mind automatically assumes,
We're talking about you.
is that because I'm insecure? It's not because I'm insecure. Insecurity could be a form of this. It's a very common form of it.
Well, when you think someone's gossiping about you,
I didn't say
that's
gossiping.
what insecurity is.
It's because what's the thing that's most real to me? Yourself. Because I'm very attached to myself. And therefore, every time something, right, you always tend to err on the side that has more to do with you Now, obviously, if something is obviously nothing to do with you, right, that's a problem, just not being reasonable.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Yeah.
Are we so attached to ourselves because we are ourselves, or because like we're like obsessed with ourselves, or because we like ourselves?
We are because we have something called das of klipa, and das of klipa means the power to be attached to anything that will keep you from being attached to Hashem.
So people who are like depressed and not happy with themselves, do they not have that?
Crazy.
They do have that.
We find everything
But
but
like people who don't
Hashem.
like themselves,
Also, that you could be.
they're still attached.
You want,
It's not that Hashem is concealed in this world. He's like trying to be opposite then.
right? That's what I want you to get. Is that all these things of the animal soul, like your godly soul is like I'm so attached to Hashem that makes Hashem so real to me, and the animal soul is like no. What can we? No, you're real.
So I'm
You're
saying
like
the animal soul is being like a yetzer hara, not just a nefesh Bahamas.
it's an impurity.
That's true.
I'm saying, do you get that? It's not just, I feel that now, like, it's not just like Hashem is contracted and we can't see him in this world. He's like trying us to like fight over to find him.
Right. In other words, you were used to this idea that there's like this kind of klipa that's par of kazeh.
Yeah.
And now I'm explaining to you how like at its core the animal soul, which is klipas noga, is not par of, it's quite evil. Yes. Yeah.
How do you detach yourself from yourself?
As a Jew,
Yeah.
well,
Or as just a normal person?
you can't.
As a Jew.
And as a Jew, you just...
You try to attach yourself to Hashem because you have a godly soul, right? In other words, as a person, you can't. Whatever you're doing is really just another more convoluted way of being attached to yourself. Now, it could be ultimately a very lofty moral way of being attached to yourself, right?
Yeah.
But
So,
it's nonetheless...
I know. Is this attaching yourself to yourself the same as like attaching yourself to something not good, or attaching yourself to a person that's not good?
No, it could be anything. Like, for instance, frankly, when my wife's in a bad mood, it matters much more to me than if you're in a bad mood. I don't know if that's a wrong
But
thing.
that's
That's because she's my wife, right? Perfect sense, right? Is that now? Is that the das? Now, again, this is where we have to be careful. That das is not evil in the conventional sense of evil.
Right.
But it definitely has made me, right? That kind of an experience of reality prevents you from being attached to the reality of Hashem. Now, to be fair, there's right, Hashem is manifest in all sorts of things, especially in another Jew, right? So if you're really attached to Hashem, you're also going to be really attached to other Jews, right? Right? Okay, so in other words, it's not the idea of Hashem versus people. That's like there's a way of misreading it. It's what is the link that links me to whatever else is going on. In the animal soul, it's because somehow that reflects back on myself, and the godly soul because somehow that reflects back on Hashem. And so without das, you know what, the worst thing is when you don't really have much das at all, right? There's people that don't have much das at all. Have you ever encountered people that have no real das?
Very cold.
They're cold, they're indifferent, life is just like floating from one distraction to the next. Like nothing really there's nothing that like makes them tick and turn on and like nothing is real. Everything is just like...
What about a person that refuses to attach themselves? Is it the same as that refuses to attach themselves to like Hashem or other people, like certain things?
I want to be careful that this is the area where Chassidus blends into mental illness, right? You can see, and I don't want to go into that realm, so I'm going to leave that at that.
You
But-
mentioned earlier that somebody who detaches himself from attaching so they don't suffer pain, they would be doing klipa. If they're trying to avoid attaching themselves to people to avoid the pain of attachment, then it's about them.
Yeah, so they're not really detaching themselves from themselves.
No, they
Right.
think
Right. There's a kind of egotism that's found in spirituality, which is like if I can get all of my needs met by being totally inward, then I'm not vulnerable to anything else around me, and then I can be at like some kind of inner peace.
but
So, but really the core of that is just attachment to yourself. There's a big criticism of a lot of Eastern religions in that. Yes?
When I don't think betrayed or like.
When what?
Me, when I think of like, or when you read about like great Hasidim that were like in a sense detached from this world, like.
There were no Chassidim that were detached from this world.
Yeah, when you read about Hasidim that like weren't
Down to
the
earth.
most, no, not down to earth, but like weren't the way we would describe, let's say, a relationship between a husband and a wife, or like the most, I don't know, like this, like they weren't present in a way of like, I don't know if I would say family life or if I would say physical life, but like, is that because their das and kedusha was so strong, or is that not a contradiction?
So here's the thing. It was because their das and kedusha was very strong. Now, the thing we have to remember is that godliness is itself somewhat complicated. Okay? So, for instance, if I have a lot of das, let's use an example. Let's say I have a lot of das in being healthy. Like myself, I don't want to be healthy, right? But could I make some really bad decisions because like health is a little more nuanced and complicated? Yeah, right? So, and also things go through different stages, right? And I might not realize that like stages have changed. So, one of the things that the great Hasidim struggled with is not necessarily are they have das in Hashem and therefore Hashem is real, but the nuances and complexities that arise from that.
Do you think it was a struggle? Do you think it was wrong what they were doing?
Sometimes yes and sometimes no. That's what makes it complicated. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Okay. I don't think this story should be on the. How do I?